Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ian Mitchell. I'm an economist and co-director of the Europe programme at the Centre for Global Development. And I'm really pleased today that we're putting this event together on diversity in UK economics with an excellent group of speakers, which I'll introduce in a moment. And I'm glad also to have the support of the Government Economic Service Alumni and Associates Network, which is a group which aims to strengthen the public economics community in the UK. And if you've been a member of the GES, we'll put some details up for how you can get involved in that group. If you haven't come across the Centre for Global Development before, we're a think tank in London and Washington. Our aim is to reduce global poverty and improve lives globally with rigorous economic research, focus on the key issues and institutions. And like many organisations, we've been thinking hard about the diversity of not only our staff, but the way we do our research. And so it seemed to me and to us as a group that it was important to look at the community we come from in economics in the UK and think about its diversity. And I think if you start to look into the issue, you'll see, there's not a huge amount of research or analysis on this topic. And so while there have been a couple of sessions at the Royal Economic Society and in other places, I felt that it was useful to visit the evidence to see what's important. But also at CGD, we have a very practical focus. So I hope in the course of the conversation, we'll not only understand better the trends and the patterns of diversity in UK economics, but we'll also get onto some of the practical things that we can do as employers and members of the profession to address those challenges and to improve the diversity of our makeup. So the plan will be, we're first going to kick off with a presentation on the evidence, as good economists we are, from Aaron Advani, who's a research fellow at the Institute of Fiscal Studies and has done quite a detailed analysis focused on ethnic diversity in UK economics. Then we'll hear from Felicia O'Dampton, who's now at the Resolution Foundation, but is the founder and director of the Black Economists Network. Then we hear from Claire Lombardelli, who's Chief Economic Advisor at HM Treasury, and head of the Government Economic Service, which is the largest employer of economists in the UK. And then we hear from Sarah Smith, who's Professor of Economics at Bristol University, and also co-chair of the Discover Economics campaign, which seeks to increase diversity in economics. So it's an excellent panel. I'm really looking forward to what our speakers have to say. And let me hand over to you, Aaron. Oh, sorry, before I do that, I've forgotten to mention how you pose questions. Because we're on YouTube, that needs to be done slightly differently. I will be gathering the questions and putting them to our panelists. There's three ways you can ask a question. One, you can email events@cgdev.org, and I think that will come across your screen at some point. Or you can tweet at CGDev, #CGDTalks. Or you can also submit your comments via YouTube. So they will get through and I will pose them to our panelists. So with that slight delay, now over to you, Aaron.
Great. Thanks very much, Ian. So yeah, as Ian said, I'll talk a bit about the current state of diversity in the economics profession, and then I'll hand over to the various other panelists to talk more about what is going on and what needs to go on to try to improve things, because you'll see the picture at the moment isn't exactly pretty. So we're economists here, and as Ian said, we like to think very quantitatively about problems, and so I think that's why I think it's really important to start with this discussion of where actually are we now, what do we I think the current state of play is, because if we don't understand that, it's pretty hard to know how we think about solutions. So what I'll do, I'll talk a bit first about academia and what the state of diversity is in academia. And there's a few reasons for that. I mean, one is just a very practical one, which is when you're looking at economists in the UK, there aren't very many great data sources to try and understand where there are economists. So you can get pretty clear data from academia. But I think there's a couple of other reasons beyond the fact that academics are the easiest to measure, that academics are pretty important. One is, this is joint with the Government Economic Service Alumni Network, and the GES actually, fortunately, is one of its strengths is that it really does draw on academic evidence. That academic evidence is produced by academic researchers, and so understanding the state of diversity in academia matters for the kind of evidence that, who's producing the evidence that the GES and other policymakers rely on. And the other is that if we think about the pipeline, what does the future look like? The future depends on what the students, who the students are who are studying. And we know that there's some evidence that there are these important effects that come from kind of role modeling. And so if you don't have a very diverse set of academics, that's going to have some influence on what the pipeline looks like, both on who gets into economics and who stays in economics. And so I'll then go on to talk about students. We'll talk a bit about how much the future is looking better or not in terms of diversity among our students. And then again, because this is joint with the GES Alumni Network, I'll give you a bit of an insight into what we know about diversity in the GES. We don't have huge amounts of information, but I should thank the GES hugely as the only organization that was willing to give us any data at all to learn about this question. So I think that's still pretty important. So starting off, thinking about how diverse are economists and focusing on academia, both for staff and then students, just a quick bit of background is we'll have data from the Higher Education Statistics Authority. So that's the one place where we can get really kind of high quality data on what's going on. And that gives us all students and staff at UK universities over, kind of most of the 2010s. And we'll observe sex and ethnicity and a few other characteristics. And I want to try and talk to you about who it is that is an economist, and then who will become an economist in the future. So the first place to start, before we talk about economics at all, is just to look at academia as a whole. So this is UK academia, not looking at economists, but looking at academics more generally. So little orange dots on here are showing you in the England and Wales population from the 2011 census, the 2021 census obviously not being out yet. In the 2011 census, what share of the population reports being of different ethnic minority categories. So white is excluded from here just because the majority is white, and if we show you that, all the other bars are too small to really distinguish. And what you can see is that if in a world in which academia as a whole were representative of the population at large, all those bars would be exactly at the height of the dot, and the bars would be half red, half green, because they're roughly half men, half women in the population. So the two things you can see here is those bars are very much not the same heights as the orange dots. There are some groups that are overrepresented in academia. So Chinese individuals are very overrepresented compared to their population shares. Some other ethnicities are also overrepresented, and individuals who are Pakistani and Bangladeshi ethnic backgrounds and Black individuals are all underrepresented. The other thing is that academia as a whole skews male, which I think is something we probably all know, but you kind of see here quantitatively what that looks like, and that it differs by ethnicity. So, if you look at, say, Pakistani or Bangladeshi individuals, women from, those backgrounds are much, much less likely to go on to work in academia. On the other hand, if you look at, say, Black Caribbean individuals, actually women are relatively more represented than men are, although both groups, as you can see compared to the orange dot, are underrepresented in academia as a whole. So, I mean, the big picture patterns here are, overall women are underrepresented, although that varies by ethnicity, and there are particular ethnicities that tend to be underrepresented, and that's in academia as a whole. So, compared to that benchmark, if we think of academia as, economics academia is situated within broader academia, how do we compare as a discipline to the rest of academia? So, if we were kind of proportionally represented, if economics was just the same as the rest of academia, all the bars I'm about to show you would be at this dotted line that's here. That is the share of overall academia that is made up of by economists. So economists are about 2% of all academics. So they should, in principle, if they're equally represented across all this academic discipline, be 2% for every bar. What we see is very much not that. So again, first, most striking thing is that in all but one case, the red bars are lower than the green bars. So women are, again, underrepresented, and you can kind of see quantitatively what the sizes of those effects are. The one exception being among Chinese individuals, where Chinese women are, relatively speaking, compared to their representation in academia, which is pretty low, they are overrepresented. That doesn't mean they're overrepresented compared to the population on that count, but kind of where they are in terms of academia. But overall, the ethnic background, if you looked at this, wouldn't make you too unhappy. You'd say, most ethnicities are actually kind of at that bar, or actually even above in many cases. There are certainly some groups that are less well represented. But I think what this picture doesn't tell you is I think what's something that's really crucial when we're thinking about the development of UK individuals, people who are born in the UK, spend their time in the UK. What this misses is the fact that economics, particularly and unusually among some subjects, is very international. It's much more international than some subjects that you might think of, particularly many of the humanities and some of the other social sciences that are much more, the academics are more based from the UK. And so if you focus only on people who are British and look at the ethnic background, you don't get this kind of pattern where some groups are overrepresented. Most groups are actually not doing that well. And in fact, even white individuals are kind of, in economics, we're basically not that likely to get people from the UK going into it. It's mainly that we have most of our academics are coming from outside, and we don't have a lot of people coming through the UK system into economics more generally. So I think, you know, there's this caveat of thinking, if you're thinking about what the students are doing, the students are not mostly coming into economics, and where we are getting any diversity in UK academia, it's mainly coming from the fact that we import people effectively. Thinking about the other dimension that's really important here is that was showing you universities as a whole. But if you think about where you know, people are going to be picking up research from, it's really from the research intensive universities. There's a large number of universities in the UK. The UK has a big academic sector, but many of them are really focused in practice on a lot of teaching. They provide a lot of education, both to UK individuals and people from abroad. But if you're thinking out who's producing the research that, say, GES people are reading, that comes from a particular subset of, for people from a particular subset of universities. So kind of zooming in on that group, first, let's just look at all academics again, and then we'll compare economics to that. What you can see is that the Russell group, which you could think of as the kind of research intensive universities, aren't equally representative for all groups. Again, Pakistani and Bangladeshi individuals are underrepresented if you take, say, white as a benchmark. Black individuals are substantially underrepresented. I should say here that we've kind of merged the Pakistani and Bangladeshi category and also the different black categories for the reason that these groups are so underrepresented that actually it would break disclosure rules to show them separately. So I have to kind of merge these groups. Compared to academia as a whole and the shares that are in the Russell group, economics basically it just has a kind of more extreme version of all those same trends. So we're quite similar to academia as a whole on most of these groups. Pakistani and Bangladeshi individuals who were underrepresented in the Russell group more generally, among those who are in academia, they're underrepresented in the Russell group. They're even more underrepresented in the Russell group if you compare their chance of being, as an economist, being in the Russell group. So if you're an economist, you're much more like, and Pakistani and Bangladeshi, you're even less likely to be in the Russell group relative to your chance of being in some other university. So not only are you not that likely to be in academia, but if you're in academia, you're not a research intensive university. You're not one of the people who gets to produce, who gets the time effectively to produce research that other people get to read. And that same pattern is true for black individuals. You're less likely to be in academia, as I showed you already, but even if you're in academia, you're less likely to make it to the top universities that have the time to let you produce research. So that's academia. Then the question is, you know, are things going to change? And as I said, you know, academia is interesting because it's the research that people are reading, but it's also interesting just because it's one of the places we can look at what economists are doing now. And we don't have much evidence on what economists who, you know, what the background is of economists who've gone off into the private sector or into government. Although I'll talk a bit about the GS in a little while. But we can look at students, and they're, you know, clearly the pipeline for what future economists in the UK are going to be. And we're going to see basically the same patterns. So there's huge gaps. The biggest, you know, the most striking thing out of this picture, again, is the huge the gap in the green versus the red. The women are drastically underrepresented going into undergrad. And so this does not, unfortunately, paint a great picture right now for the future of the profession, because it does not look like we've suddenly, you know, we can't look at what we saw before and say, well, you know, women were underrepresented, but that's history and, you know, life has got better and, you know, clearly things are going to change. Right now, you would not look at this picture and say things are clearly going to change, unfortunately. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I mean, I think Sarah will certainly pick up on some of what we're doing at Discover Economics to try and change this. But women are definitely underrepresented. In terms of the ethnic minority, the ethnic backgrounds, here what you see is that actually, just on this picture, you wouldn't say that individuals from different ethnic minority backgrounds are particularly underrepresented. Indians are clearly the most striking group here, where they're actually heavily overrepresented in economics compared to what you might otherwise expect. The other groups actually, you know, white individuals are actually, for the most part, the least likely to do economics, conditional on going to university at all. They're more likely to pick some other subject. But as I'll show you in a moment, that again masks this effect of Russell group versus non-Russell group universities. And so this research intensive university thing is again going to be very important. So here what we've done, just because the scales are going to be a bit all over the place, what this graph is doing is, for white individuals, we'll normalize them. So we'll take them as the benchmark, and there are clearly issues around doing that. But if we take white individuals as representative in some sense, and say the share, the share of white undergrads who go to Russell groups, we'll normalize that to 1 for all. This is across all degree subjects first. Then how do the other ethnic minorities fare compared to that? How likely are they to be in the Russell group compared to how likely white individuals are? What you can see is that Indian and Chinese individuals are more likely to be in the Russell group relative to their white counterparts. Pakistani and Bangladeshi individuals and black individuals are again the same groups that we've seen before, the ones who are least likely to make it to the Russell group. That's again across all subjects. And replicating what we've seen before, the same kind of pattern is true for economics, which is that those groups are even less well represented in economics at the Russell group than they are elsewhere. So in a way, the message is short and simple, because it's the same message across every picture we look at, which is women are underrepresented, Pakistani, Bangladeshi individuals and black individuals are underrepresented, and those underrepresentations are particularly bad when you look at the top universities. So the situation doesn't at the moment look great, and that's why it's going to be important to have the conversation we'll have shortly about how things can be made to change. The other thing I want to talk on in terms of universities is also the role of private schools. So here what we've got is 4 bars showing you boys and girls separately, private schools, and then state schools on the right-hand 2 bars. And what you can see is that the red dots are telling you the share of them that go on to do economics at the undergrad. So on the right-hand axis, so 7.5% of private school boys go on to do economics at undergrad, compared to only 3% of state school boys. So they're much more likely even than state school boys are. And then for girls, both those shares are much lower. So even the girls who go to private schools are only about as likely to go and do economics at undergrad as the boys who go to state schools. And the state school girls are really not very likely to go and do it. And that pattern maps on very directly to the shares that do economics at A-level. So the A-level is really crucial. You can really see that these are on different scales, and that's because of the fact that even if you do economics A-level, there's something else you might want to go and do. But you can see that the same pattern arises, that people who do the A-level are much more likely to go on, and it's these private school boys who are really going to do it. And there's a mix of reasons for that. There's a mix of girls are less likely to have access, for example, to A-level, and state school students are certainly much less likely to have access to A-level. It's also the case that actually girls, even where they have access to A-level, are a bit less likely to take A-level economics. And so that's the other part of the story here. It's not just about access to the A-level, it's also about people having the right image, effectively, of what economists really do. Because it's that idea that we do a set of kind of financial boring stuff rather than the real practical challenges that actually people in the GES work on. That not understanding that there are those cool social policy issues to spend time on is one of the big barriers, and I think something that getting that message out there is going to be crucial if we're going to change things. So in terms of what's going on in the GES, I wanted to kind of briefly touch on this, and I should say again, thank you hugely to the GES for giving us access to the data, because nobody else did, and so we wouldn't know what the picture looks like elsewhere. That said, the story isn't great, even at the GS. And I know the GS has been doing a lot. I'm sure Claire will talk about the things that GS has been doing to change things. And not all of that will be featured in what we can see in these particular numbers. So this is looking at individuals who go into the FAST stream. And we only got data based on ethnicity, not on sex, so I can only tell you about ethnicity here. So what we've done here is to normalize the number of applications for both ethnic minority individuals, all grouped here because that's what we got is just ethnic minority individuals without any breakdown of their background, versus white individuals. And we normalize the number of applications to 1 in both cases. And you can look at the probability of getting through the next stages. So you can see that ethnic minority individuals are less likely to actually complete the online test in the first place, conditional on having applied. So they get put off even at that stage. Conditional on doing that, they're still less likely to pass that online test. They're even less likely to then get through the next stage of passing the other fast stream tests. And then they're even less likely to get an offer conditional on getting to that stage. So at each stage, ethnic minority individuals are being filtered out. And that's kind of striking because you'd sort of hope that, maybe there's some difference because, I showed you already they go to different universities and that filters out at some stage. And then after that, it's just, everyone has the same chance of getting through and all the filtering happens at one stage. Instead, what we see is that at every stage, ethnic minority individuals are getting filtered out. They're getting less likely to go through. And so that's unfortunate, and I think we don't have more information at this stage to know kind of why that's happening. But I think that's an important sort of challenge, at least for GES, to think about, what should it be doing, what is it doing, and is it addressing this challenge, is it understanding what the steps are. But having this data at least gives us a first understanding of where the problems are. And so on that note, I mean, I think the key questions are, what is being done right now, and what more needs to be done. And I'm very happy that I have a huge panel of great people who are going to take over from here and tell us all about those things. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Aaron. Thank you. And I mean, it's tempting, isn't it, to start wishing we had more data and to ask questions about what more we should know. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that we just didn't even have this understanding really in a comprehensive way. But just one brief question. So I used to work on higher education in the Department for Education, and the patterns are really familiar. The prior attainment matters hugely. The number of people going to university broadly reflects prior attainment, but the people going to the Russell Group or the more challenging universities, there's a much bigger differential. Has anyone tried to do any controlling for prior attainment and regression analysis to sort of tease out what are there additional variables that you've seen, or is that on anyone's agenda going forward?
It's on my agenda at the moment. I have a very, very, very long-standing request in to have access to the data, to have permission to do that analysis, and we're all very happy to be doing it, and we're just waiting for the permissions to go through. I should say it's not the Department for Education's fault on that one. The data needs to come back from somewhere else, but until we get permission to do it, we're not allowed to do it. But it's very much on the agenda of some of the same team that put together that first work. We're interested in doing that. Our understanding so far is that it's not all explained by prior attainment, but I think what we can see even from what we showed is one of the biggest things is access to economics, and I think that's a different thing that should be on the agenda for, say, Department for Education, is really thinking about why is economics, which is kind of crucial not only for understanding of the world around us, but also for our ability to kind of vote and get on with normal citizenship life. Why is that not anywhere in the school curriculum? Why could you get through your entire school career not knowing anything about economics? And then how are you supposed to be economically literate and understand anything about when politicians make claims about X billion this and whatever billion that? How can you understand that if you've never had the chance to sit through any of it? So I think it matters for kind of citizenship reason, as well as for kind of our profession more generally and who's making policy. But hopefully, at some point, maybe someone DFE here listening to this, and they may, or ex-DFE who has contacts there apart from you, that might help change that.
Great. I didn't know you were doing that, so that wasn't set up.
It's not been widely known.
Sounds like an excellent next step. So thank you, Aaron. I think we'll get on to some of the practical steps in the discussion. So Felicia, welcome. It's great to have you here. I see that you've now joined the alumni of the GES.
Yeah.
So you haven't got your ultimate boss on the call anymore.
No.
It'd be great to hear about your experience of setting up the Black Economists Network, and also any reflections that you've got on diversity in the profession and what more it should be doing.
Sure. I'm just going to share my presentation now. So hopefully everything works okay. Oops, please bear with me. Cool. Let me know if you can see this. Can you see my presentation?
Yep.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm just going to get started with who we are, the Black Economist Network, also TBEN for short. So our mission, we're basically an organization dedicated to provide a platform through which professionals and students of Black African and Black Caribbean descent in economics or related fields can connect, collaborate, share ideas and support each other. But we also have a mission in that we seek to challenge the lack of diversity in economics related fields by bringing together and raising the profile of Black people in economics and working alongside other organizations on their diversity strategies. So I'm going to go into a little bit more about the founding story, why I founded TBEN, and my experiences. So I guess since the age of 17, A-level stage, I was really interested in economics, especially in its ability to solve some of the most complex issues, from like climate change to inequality, living standards. So I decided to take it at university. I did my undergrad at the University of Manchester, and then I did my master's at LSE. And what, academia in general has a race issue. And then I joined the GES, and I was the only Black female economist in the department, alongside the other only Black male economist in the department. We started at the same time, so I had no idea what the situation was before that, and after that, after I left. But I realized after I started digging deeper into the issue that this was more widespread across the economics profession than I thought, especially in the UK. And there was actually nobody talking about it, nobody doing anything about it. So I was like, okay, I want to meet other Black economists. I want to get to know what's going on. So that's the birth story of TBAN. We launched in November 2019, and since then we've grown a lot. But delving into this issue, just looking at the literature and everything, what I found was that mainstream economics isn't adequately equipped to handle racial issues. And this is because the main principles usually focus on utility, rational choice, and race is usually treated as an exogenous factor. So, outside of our understandings of how the economy operates. And this framework and how we use the economy, how we understand the economy, is often presented as objective, unbiased, non-ideological. But with any subject in the social sciences, it's all a bit of a social construct, and it's underpinned by ideologies. Individual behaviors reflect norms, group identities, and a range of belief systems. So by treating race, ethnicity as exogenous from our understanding of the economic system, any discrimination is therefore justified. And this matters. This has wider implications in society. So a lack of diversity in the highest echelons of economic policy making and research has implications for wider society. So it has a lack of attention to issues that affect particular minority groups, which therefore translate to a lack of information and data, and ultimately poor decision making and negative outcomes. So it really does deprive economics of its best chance to serve everyone most effectively. And we see this through different examples, right? So this is a UK specific examples. We've got issues like coronavirus, where Black youth were 3 times more likely to be jobless after the pandemic. Black people are 4 times more likely to die from COVID-19. Black applicants less likely to be offered PhD places, and the list goes on. And these are all examples of how, by ignoring race in our understanding of how the economy works, it just touches upon so many different areas. And that's why it's important. However, we can change this. It doesn't have to be like this. Economists hold some of the most powerful positions in society with the ability to form policies and change lives. But these policy recommendations and analysis underpinning them are really dependent on whose perspectives are being included. We have a role as the economics community to play in the change for action to help building inclusive systems for all, and increasing diversity in economics is really an important part of that solution. So at TBAN, we have 4 main aims. First is to connect. So we want to build a community for professionals in the field to collaborate and establish lifelong networks, because it can be isolating out here. It can be like, whoa, where are all the Black economists? Do I fit in and stuff? So we really want to build confidence by creating this community. And that's through our membership in our network. Then we want to also educate. So we want to equip our members, current and aspiring, with knowledge on career options and skills that are needed to progress in the field of economics, and just raise awareness about different roles you can do with economics. Then we also want to inspire. So this is not only for our members, but also the wider economics community. So we want to encourage debate on topical economic issues and alternative economic perspectives, as well as promote an environment where people can learn from each other. And then finally, which is a really key part of our overall mission, is to have influence. We really want to change the status quo, and we want to work with economic organizations to do this and challenge the lack of diversity in economics. So as it stands, our membership has now grown to over 500 members, of which most are students, and the other half basically are professionals in a range of different fields. And our membership is now global. So we have members in Africa, from Ghana, Malawi, Uganda, Zimbabwe, to the Americas, in Brazil, Canada, Jamaica, the States, and obviously Europe, UK, France, Germany, etc. And we've been able to work with a range of different organizations and a range of different projects, from building diversity in recruitment, really raising the awareness of Black people in economics and Black issues in economics and racial issues through Black History Month initiatives, and also providing a platform for Black economists for them to be heard, whether that's engaging in webinars, festivals, events, writing blogs, you name it. We really want to empower Black economists so that they can actually, feel like they have a place in the field of economics as well. Internally, we're offering a mentor scheme. So we're going to launch a mentorship scheme soon. So we'll be asking for members of the economics community to sign up as mentors. We also have like little engagements where we have discussions, people can share ideas. This is in our WhatsApp group and our TBAN Connect, where we meet our members regularly and have a range of opportunities as well from the economics community that we share with our members. So in our first year, we were able to achieve a lot. We had our International Women's Month series, we launched, we had a new committee, and we collabed with many organizations. And then since we started fundraising, we've been able to do even much more. So we've launched our website, we've been able to launch a program with Frontier Economics, the consultancy, our Black Heritage Insight program. We've launched a podcast as well, and we've done a graduate and PhD application series based in the UK and the States as well. We're going to be launching a fundraiser soon, which I'll talk about later. But we can't do all this work by ourselves because ultimately it's an issue with the entire economics community. So in speaking to the members about what we would like to see from the economics community, I was able to break this down into 4 important parts. So starting off with increased visibility. So this is ultimately about actively seeking Black economists to speak at events, write articles, and comment on a range of economic issues that aren't just race, because believe it or not, Black economists actually are interested in other issues that aren't necessarily to do with race. And then the second one is increased relatability. So this is not just relevant for race and in economics, but the more in the wider mission to diversify economics, it has to be relatable to other people. And it makes economics less isolating and foreign. If the goal of economics is to increase diversity and be inclusive, then the material has to be more relatable to everyone's experiences, right? Then thirdly, we need increased support. We need donations. We need partnering to deliver events, talks, workshops and stuff, and initiatives like mentorship training programs. Like we just need general support if we're really trying to shake things up in the economic space. And then finally, increased opportunities. So this is basically by supporting potential and current economists throughout the pipeline, creating targeted outreach programs, just to introduce economics as a viable option to Black students from the very beginning, which like Aaron has talked about in his evidence presentation, it filters through at each stage. We also talk about what economics organizations can do. So we're really pleased that there's no longer the BAME categorization. We think that's a positive step to talking in general about race in anything, not just economics, because now we need better data collection and disaggregation of data, so we can be a bit more transparent about what we're doing, about how we can find solutions, etc. We also call for targeted initiatives because there are issues across the pipeline. We really believe organizations should work to develop specific and targeted outreach programs and develop talent programs and initiatives to improve the progression of existing economists. And then finally, data analysis. So across some public organizations, not all, the treatment of analysis on race, especially like the public sector quality duty, is not approached as a core part of the analysis. This is not just for public sector, but can be in research as well, where race is often added as an end, as a tick box exercise, like, oh, hey, and this is how it's broken down into ethnicity. But we really want coordinated efforts to look into how analysis, policy making, research can be conducted so that this is no longer the case. So that's what we are asking from the economics community. There's a range of ways that you can support us as an organization. You can donate, you can join our mailing list to keep update to what we're doing. You can also collaborate with us. Simple email, collabs@tben.co.uk. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be launching our fundraiser. So this is coming up soon. And as we continue to grow, and we're moving into a new phase of delivering our mission, we really want to call upon our supporters and the community to help us raise £5,000, which will enable us to sustain our operation. So this is going to be launched later on this week. So please keep a lookout for everything. But ultimately, the situation of race in the UK and economics is, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we are making efforts, we're making strides, and we really hope that, we can work together to change the situation and ultimately create economic research, policy, and outcomes that works for everyone and isn't dependent on the color of your skin. So that's me. These are how you can contact us. But yeah, thank you so much.
Great, Felicia, thank you so much. I mean, it's an incredible piece of leadership that you've undertaken to establish it, and it's great hearing about it. But I also really like the practical elements of it. That as we're sitting here in a think tank or in a university, there are a set of steps that you can check yourself against. Visibility, relatability, support, and opportunities, and the offer to work with you directly is excellent. So thank you very much for that.
No worries.
So let's come next to Claire. Great, thank you for participating in this panel, Claire. And as Aaron's already said, thank you for sharing the data on the GES. I'm very interested to hear your perspective on diversity in the GES and how it's changed. My perception is, I was aware of a very active women economists group while I was in the GES, and it seemed like there was progress on that, but I'd be interested to hear where you think that's got to and what the future challenges are.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you for organising this event. It's great to be part of such a fantastic panel. It's really fantastic this is happening. It's an urgent conversation, really, and a very important one. So look, I think we would all agree we need to make the economics profession more diverse. We need to change, ourselves to do that for a few reasons, and I'll touch on these because I think it's really important that we all sort of recognise the importance here. So, first, frankly, it would make us better economists. There's a wealth of evidence now out there that basically says greater diversity leads to greater performance. Our ideas are better, the implementation of those ideas is better, risks are better understood, considered, mitigated if you've got more diverse groups of people thinking about these things. As Felicia has said, economics is a hugely impactful profession. In the public sector, we spend our time sort of understanding and advising on policies that affect literally every citizen. In the private sector, economists play a really crucial role, enhancing productivity, helping innovation, adding value. And in the sort of charity sector, economists are busy improving effectiveness and impact. So, if I think about from a public sector perspective, what I see, a diversity of perspective does help us make better policy, right? We are much better able to understand the people we are trying to impact with our policies if we represent them better. So, very sort of clear case there. And then finally, I mean, it's very obvious there's masses of talent out there that the economics profession is just not harnessing, right? We clearly are not getting the best people into our profession if we're actually only, focusing and only have a sort of very small proportion of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. If we have, such a low proportion of women, there's clearly a lot of talent out there that we are just not picking up and not benefiting from. So let me talk a bit about the GES. So as Ian said, we're the largest body of economists in the UK. Our members work across the public sector. They work across the UK in all sort of nations and regions. And, as such, we have very strong responsibility to improve the diversity of our membership because we play such a big role in the economics profession. It's a responsibility we take very seriously, and it requires us to think about diversity of the whole profession more broadly and also think about the steps that we take. So the composition of our membership, it is closely related to the composition of the economics profession across the UK. Aaron took us through the data on academics. And, we don't have a lot of data about other economists outside of that. But, we do need to work with colleagues in academia and in other organisations to try and make some serious and sustained improvements here. I mean, frankly, any action in this space will benefit all of us. So as you'd expect, and as we heard from at the start of this, we start with the data and what it is telling us. The GES has done a lot of work, particularly in the last few years, to try and understand the diversity of our membership. I mean, being frank, we do better in some areas than others. But broadly speaking, we find that women, ethnic minorities, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are underrepresented in the government economic service, just as they are in the profession as a whole. So looking at the numbers, just to give you them the sort of headline numbers, so 38% of government economic service economists are women. That is actually higher than the profession as a whole. We think, not sure, because we don't really know much about the stock, but certainly when you look at the flow, 20% of GES economists are from diverse ethnic backgrounds. We don't, the data gets to, a bit to Aaron's point, you get to very small sample sizes for some ethnicities, which in itself indicates a problem. And socioeconomic background, this is a bit of a lagger in terms of our data. Data is really hard to get, as many people on this call will know, about socioeconomic background. So we don't know as much about the stock there as we do about the flow, but we do, for example, know that the success rates for applicants to our fast stream scheme are much, much lower from people of low socioeconomic background than they are from people of higher, multiples lower. It's really very striking. So look, we've done a lot of work to better understand what's driving these diversity outcomes, and there's broadly 4 areas of diversity, 4 areas where I would say this sort of really affects our members. So the first is we think about the pipeline of applicants and how we get people in. The second is the sort of recruitment outcomes, and Aaron showed you some data about how at the various stages we're seeing colleagues of diverse ethnic backgrounds sort of falling out at the various stages. So that's an example of the sorts of things we're thinking around on recruitment outcomes. The experience of our members while working in the GES, where we've done some surveying and some investigation into what that experience is, and of course retention and progression. So we're thinking about all of these. We have better data on some than others, so we know a lot more about our pipeline and our recruitment outcomes than we know about the stock of our members and about experience and retention and progression, though we are trying to do more to understand both those. What our analysis basically shows is that the barriers to improving diversity actually differ for different groups. So, this is a problem that is going to need lots of different interventions to try and solve. So if we take gender, for example, the biggest challenge that we face as the GES on increasing female representation is the pipeline of applicants. You saw that in Aaron's data, right? Just fewer women study economics. Only about a quarter of undergraduate economics are undergraduates studying economics are women, and very depressingly, and this is really depressing, there's a consistent and there's a rising gap between the number of men and women doing economics. So actually, in a sense, this is sort of getting worse on the gender side. However, women that do study economics do really well in the GES. So we've got a slightly higher success rate interview for women than for male applicants. And from sort of that point of view and the numbers, women are overrepresented in the GES. So, not so there aren't any issues there, but we have definitely, as you said, we've done more and we're making a bit more progress now. I suspect possibly because we focused on this earlier and we've it's been a focus for longer, and we could discuss that. If we contrast that with increasing our ethnic diversity, the challenge there for us is more around the recruitment stage. All right, so you saw that data that Aaron showed you. We do know that those from diverse ethnic backgrounds have a lower success rate than their white counterparts across all our major recruitment schemes. So we've got multiple schemes, and I'll come on to talk a bit about the different schemes we have, but we do know that sort of white candidates are sort of more likely to get through every single stage. And for some of our entry routes, particularly the fast stream, that difference is really, really stark. So for the fast stream applicants, candidates with diverse ethnic backgrounds are less than half as likely to succeed as white colleagues are. Like I say, we've got different routes and that's in a sense the worst in those ones, but it's really striking. And then another thing we know is if we talk to our staff about their experience, we have what we call sort of inclusion gap, which is our staff surveys show that women in the GES, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds, disabled members of the GES. We haven't talked much about disability, but again, economics has a real problem when it comes to disability. All of those, all the people with those characteristics feel less included in their teams, though they report that they feel less included in their teams, and they're more likely to feel less positive about their prospects for progression, and they're more likely to consider leaving the government economic service. So, you can see we've got a mix of areas we need to focus on, and there's obviously lots of different levers we can pull, but that gives you a bit of a sort of snapshot of what the picture looks like to sort of complement what Aaron was talking through. before. So on progress, what are we doing? I mean, it's not all doom and gloom here. I would say we've got a very active agenda in the GES to improve our diversity and our inclusion, and we think about both. Both really matter. And I think there are lots and lots of reasons for optimism here. I mean, thanks to the work we've done over the last few years, we do know a lot more about the problem, and ultimately knowledge is power, right? So we just understand a bit better what we are dealing with, which enables us to sort of target our interventions and make changes. Having now understood or seen the problem we've got on applications and the process around, for example, ethnicity, that allows us to target those processes and dig into more detail. What is it specifically? What is it about the way we do interviews? What is it about the way we do assessments that are putting people off? And how do we address that? So look, starting with the data, we know a lot more about the economics profession as a whole. We certainly know about the flow of the economics profession than we used to. And in the GES, we've done a lot to understand our population. I mean, there's more that we're doing here. We're about to undertake a really large project to improve our data, improving our management information, looking at our recruitment data, looking at socioeconomic background. As I said at the start, that's quite early on. That's quite a difficult one to get your sort of head around. You get your information on. But that's no excuse, and so we are starting to collect that application stage so we can understand that a bit better. That will help us build a much better picture of who our members are and help us address those. So on socioeconomic background, we basically know we've got a problem, but we don't really understand the data enough to understand it. I mean, another area that we've taken really big steps on recently and continue to is recruitment. So the biggest thing that we've done is we have introduced an apprentice scheme, degree apprentices, to diversify our recruitment pathway. So this has basically reduced our dependence on the university pipeline by creating our own route that people can come and become economists in the government direct from school or from college, and while they're working, do their degree. I mean, it's early days, we're a few years in, but it's been a big success. The proportion of women in that scheme is half, it's 49%. The proportion of people from diverse ethnic backgrounds is 34%. So that is higher than it is in the government economic service as a whole, and it looks to be considerably higher than what the outflow from academia. So that's one thing we've done, is very actively just create a new route effectively. We're doing a lot on outreach. We've refreshed our strategy to better target pupils in lower socioeconomic categories, trying to ensure that economics feels accessible to more people. And this new strategy is going to launch in September, and it's going to focus on delivering outreach for people in the 15 to 18 age group to try and influence their choices post 18. We've also done a lot to change the way in which we govern and run ourselves as the government economic service. So including in particular, we've now got a shadow board that is up and running. So what that does is mean that as a professional body, all the decisions we take about how we shape and manage ourselves harnesses a much wider range of people from across the GES. So it gives us much greater access to different perspectives, experiences, backgrounds, viewpoints in the decision making that we're doing, to try and sort of open that up and make it more relevant, more useful, more effective. So look, I mean, as a profession, we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves, right, and question, why are we so narrow? There's been some really good analysis that's sort of increasingly coming out now, and increasingly there's evidence both in the UK and from the States about what, as a profession, how we're sort of performing in this space. I mean, there's no inevitability here. As a discipline, there is so much variety in economics, and we have the privilege of working on the most important and interesting issues facing society. As Felicia said, right, it's a really, really fundamentally fascinating subject. It's a real privilege to work on it. This is an offer that should attract the widest range of people, to the profession. So we've got a really, really good offer there. And we also have a lot of agency and control. The people on this call, people listening amongst us, to try and change the way in which we operate as a profession, both the formal ways in which we run ourselves, but also the informal rules and ways we operate. And there's things like the way we communicate about economics. We can make that much more accessible. We can make that much more attractive to people, so that more of those women will apply, more people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds will take an interest, more people from different ethnic backgrounds will feel it is relevant to them. So look, we've got lots of ways as a profession we can think about the way we teach, the way we talk about it, the way we recruit and develop our economists. I mean, there's a huge job here, But I think increasingly we are seeing the profession welcoming this and understanding we've got a real desire to do it. So look, hopefully we can get into a bit more of this when we talk in the Q&A after. Thanks.
Great, Claire. Thank you, and thank you for being so open about where you are with it and sharing some of the kind of interim data. I think it's got to be like that, and I'm interested in the questions we'll get from the audience shortly on whether people think there's more that needs to be done, and whether people have got ideas for that. I mean, I think certainly the apprenticeship story you told, that was just getting off the ground when I left the GES a few years ago, but it sounds like it's got some it's a real hands-on change of policy that has some promise. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out, and very interesting to hear about the shadow board as well. So just before I come to Sarah, so questions, you can email events@cgdev.org. You can put them on Twitter at CGDev or #CGD Talks, and we'll pick them up. Or you can submit them via YouTube. So do please start getting those in. I'm sure our panelists are looking forward to some challenges and hearing your reflection and ideas. Okay, so let's come to our final speaker. Sarah, I mean, I think it's obvious, isn't it, throughout the other talks, the importance of the pipeline, if you like, and the background qualifications that people are pursuing at school, and it seems to be Discover Economics is about that. So really look forward to hearing about what it's up to and your reflections on what the profession needs to do.
Thanks very much. So I think I was going to talk a little bit about higher education in general. So starting with talking about some of the initiatives to change the composition of academics, and then I'll move on to Discover Economics, if that's okay. So obviously there are a number of dimensions where economics is not representative. I think gender sort of has stood out and has been one that certainly the Royal Economic Society has tracked over time. I think both Claire and Felicia and Arun have highlighted the importance of data. I think solving the problem really starts with the data, which makes the problem visible and also helps to identify the exact areas where the problems arise. So we've been tracking sort of gender in academic economics departments for a number of years, and seen that kind of there has been progress, but it's largely stalled since about 2012. So, it's not a problem which is going to disappear over time. It's a problem where concerted effort is required. And actually one thing that I want to highlight is, it's particularly important to think about gender at the moment because of COVID. We're becoming increasingly aware that COVID has had a really unequal impact on men and women. And we've seen this very immediately in academic outputs, which are obviously very individual. And so in economics, COVID has been an amazing opportunity for economists to show that how much economics can engage with real world issues, and there's been an explosion of new research into COVID, but really it's mainly male economists who've taken advantage of kind of the opportunity to write new papers, and women are much less likely to produce COVID related papers because they've been at home with the increased burden of childcare, possibly with the increased burden of emotional labor and the increased burden of, I think, admin that has fallen on universities. So it's very timely to kind of think about that. And these kind of temporary changes that we've seen through lockdowns can have permanent effects. And we've seen that in academia, but actually it's almost a message for any organization that we need to think about the increasing gender inequality that's going to arise out of COVID. So just, Aaron's kind of already shown the numbers in terms of sort of gender in the profession. So we know that there are sort of 32% of lecturers and 15% of professors. There are around 30% of undergraduates, but interestingly, 52% of master's students. And the reason that it's higher with master's students, I think, is because in the UK, we attract a lot of international master's students. So I think that gives an insight into the fact that this is, this isn't necessarily a problem that's affecting economics worldwide. We know that there are a lot of similarities between the US and the UK, but actually there are other countries where economics is much more appealing to women. So perhaps some of those international comparisons would be interesting. Going back to undergraduate, again, we have seen very little progress in terms of broadening the set of people who flow into economics. and we lag well behind STEM, where, you know, STEM had a gender problem. It put concerted effort into addressing that problem. And now there's a much higher share of women studying math, studying chemistry, studying biology than there is studying economics. You know, so when you say there aren't enough girls studying economics, people say, aha, but that's because economics is mathematical. But actually, you know, the maths in maths isn't putting girls off as much as, you know, economics is putting girls off. So I think there is something very specific about economics, which sort of is deterring kind of a whole set of people from entering at the bottom. And then there's the issue of the leaky pipeline once you get in, and the fact that, you know, the sort of transition almost from lecturer to professor perhaps is not a leap that many women are making. So the data is the starting point, and then, you know, having identified the problems, the question then is what you do about it. So I think we're making some progress in academia in terms of testing initiatives and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. So I'm sure this is the case outside academia, but in academia, you know, a solution to the problem of a lack of diversity in who you hire is often to have diverse selection panels. But the evidence is increasingly showing that diverse selection panels do not improve the diversity of the people that you hire. And in fact, sort of, you know, if there's a woman on a panel, then the men sort of are almost given license to sort of be discriminatory, and women suffer from implicit bias just as much as men do. And putting a lot of women on diverse selection panels actually probably gives them an increased burden of admin, which doesn't help their careers. So I think it's good to kind of have the data not only on the extent of the problem, but also the data to kind of try and give some insights into what works and what doesn't work. I think there's mixed evidence on implicit bias training. I think that's a very interesting area to explore, and perhaps something that, you know, the GES could do some interesting, you know, testing of to kind of find out what works and what doesn't work. And I think we need more evidence to sort of figure out what particular policies are going to help address some of the problems that have been identified. Some of the things that have been shown to work, one is mentoring. So very early on, the US Women's Committee sort of trialed a mentoring program. It was very successful and oversubscribed, so they randomly selected the participants, and then they followed them, you know, during the rest of the careers, and they found that participation in sort of mentoring events increased the probability of promotion and increased the sort of publications that these women got. So we don't really know why mentoring works, whether it's giving people access to networks or giving them sort of a body of knowledge. But clearly that kind of mentoring, it can be effective. And that's something that both the European Economic Association and the UK Royal Economic Society have kind of adopted, and hopefully that will help. I have heard increased discussion of reciprocal mentoring. So I think that would, you know, I think that's all, again, something that would be really interesting to trial and test, where, you know, rather than mentoring the women to sort of succeed in a sort of male-dominated society, we sort of mentor the men to kind of try to change the culture. And I think that's a really, interesting idea to explore. I think, you know, there has been increasing discussion of the culture in economics. So, you know, the way economists behave, I mean, in academic departments, possibly also outside academia. So economists are typically seen as very kind of competitive and very critical and perhaps very hierarchical. So again, you know, data is revealing the extent to which these kind of sort of perceptions are actually sort of true in behavior that takes place. So a number of academics kind of sort of they employed teams of PhD students to sort of sit in academic seminars and take down the number of questions that were asked and make observations about the nature of questions. And they found that sort of junior women were asked many more questions, and those questions were often more aggressive than the questions asked to junior men, particularly by senior men. So we're providing, you know, hard evidence that there is this quite, you know, competitive, aggressive culture. And I think addressing culture, making changes to culture is incredibly difficult. But, you know, some concrete steps, such as, for example, changing the way seminars are conducted, I think that's a sort of a positive change that can be made. And sort of MIT, for example, has adopted a new set of rules, which then, you know, if MIT does it, then other departments will follow suit. I think, you know, the culture is sort of linked to a sort of the structure of kind of academic economics, I think, and the the dominance by an elite set of journals. Economics is hierarchical in a way that no other discipline is. So there's this national research assessment exercise. So you can kind of see the sort of the output quality of different departments, and the gap between the top department in economics and the 10th department in economics is way greater than the gap in sort of output score between the top department in other disciplines and the 10th department in other disciplines. In other words, so you just have this really hierarchical sort of set of institutions. And I think this is very much linked to the fact that we have a very narrow way of measuring and defining quality in terms of an sort of an elite set of journals. And defining quality in terms of elite set of journals gives enormous power to a very small number of people who define quality. And it also can give enormous power to people who have the set of publications. And I think that can lead to sort of, you know, some kind of, yeah, it leads to sort of, I think, bad behavior and this kind of competitive, aggressive culture, which is sort of then sort of shown up in these seminars. So I think there's possibly sort of features of economics that kind of needs to change. I think Felicia mentioned, you know, sort of the way economics in the past has treated race. I think the narrowness of teaching, you know, there's been criticisms of academic economists focusing very much on abstract models and not relating economics to the real world. I do think a lot of that is changing. You know, we've had the core economics curriculum, which has sort of mainly come out of UCL, but been adopted by a number of institutions, which is much more real world based, data driven. So I think, you know, and I think there also is a lot of discussion about, you know, how economists treat issues like race. There are sort of initiatives to decolonize economics in universities. I think all of these are important. I think those initiatives alone won't, however, sort of solve the problem of the entry into the pipeline. You know, I think that I think partly people may perceive universities as not teaching the right thing in economics, but I think the main problem, which Arun has already alluded to, is just that most people don't perceive economics at all, or if they do, you know, it's really a sort of a very narrow definition of economics as being kind of about money and finance and about having this very sort of restricted identity as being sort of predominantly populated by sort of white men in suits kind of thinking about money. And I think that is a real problem with economics. So I think Arun referred to it as an access problem and highlighted the fact that, you know, it is quite incredible that this is a subject which, as, you know, Claire said, it's hugely important to, you know, the way our society runs, but yet it is a subject that is basically absent from a whole load of schools. You know, there are many, many schools which do not teach economics at all. There isn't any economics on the national curriculum. So many students can go through, you know, their entire sort of school career without understanding, you know, what economics is about, because they've never really been exposed to it in any kind of meaningful way. They don't have the opportunity to study it. And so when they're making choices about what to study at university, it simply kind of doesn't enter their choice sets. And we know that the people who don't have access to economics are more likely to be in state schools, and they're more likely to be women in sort of single sex schools. And also the fact that women are more likely to go to state schools kind of also plays into that. So this is, you know, this is a fundamental problem when there's, you know, a discipline which, you know, is so important to the way our society runs, which is essential. You know, it's essential to have some economic literacy to be, you know, to be a citizen and to engage properly with sort of politics and, you know, the society that we live in. And yet, you know, so many people just lack the opportunity to kind of study it. So I think, you know, and, you know, if you look behind the access problem, you'll see you know, there's a very limited supply of economics teachers. There's very few opportunities for would-be teachers to train to be economics teachers. And obviously there are, you know, good opportunities for, you know, people who do economics to go off and do other things, and very little government support for people to train as economics teachers. So you get a big supplement to train to be a geography teacher, you don't get the supplement to train to be a sort of business and economics teacher. So I think there are some structural issues around access to economics in schools that, you know, perhaps I think should kind of be something that's sort of taken up as sort of by the government. So this is what you know, Discover Economics is trying to target. So, you know, looking at the problem, you know, why don't people study economics at university? well, you know, a lot goes to do with the fact that they just don't have access to economics in school. They just don't know what economics is about. And if they do think about what economics is about, they think of it as being about, you know, money and finance. You know, if you ask 15 to 17-year-olds what do they think economics is, they'll say, oh, it's money and finance. And if you ask them to draw an economist, it's a very, very sad picture of, you know, a man in a suit thinking about money. And if you type, you know, economist into Google images, you get exactly the same thing, a little kind of, you know, cartoon man in a suit thinking about money. So it's an access problem, an information problem, and an identity problem. So about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, we launched a campaign within the Royal Economic Society to sort of try and provide information and opportunities to 15 to 17-year-olds to find out what economics is about. And also to amplify the voices of underrepresented groups, to try and move away from this image of an economist as someone who's white and male to an image of an economist who's someone just like, you know, someone in a school who might be thinking about studying it. We don't have a whole load of resources, so we're trying to sort of leverage a lot of sort of networks or create networks that might of people who might be interested in various ways. So we have a network of academic champions, so sort of people working in widening participation in universities. We have a sort of network of teachers who we're working with. We have a network of professional champions. You know, we think there's a role for professional champions to both mentor students and to talk about what they do. I think, you know, if you talk to sort of students about what they want to know, they want to hear personal stories from economists. They want to know what economists do. They want to kind of see economists who are like them and know that, you know, this is a transition that they can make. You know, there are other subjects that students can't access at school, like medicine or engineering, but most people have a pretty good idea of what a doctor is or what an engineer does. You know, very few people know what an economist does or where an economics degree can take you. So this is, again, you know, a really key sort of information gap that we need to kind of fill. And then finally, we're hoping to launch a sort of student champions network, and have kind of university students going into schools to kind of sort of spread the message. I think this is one way to try and sort of scale up that sort of information opportunities. I think, you know, initiatives like the apprenticeship program are fantastic, but I think we really need to think about, you know, if we're really going to solve the problem, I think we need to be very bold and think about the kind of activities and initiatives that can be done at scale, because this is very, you know, this is a large scale problem. And, you know, our third objective, which we see as a longer term objective, but I think would be the real key to success, is trying to get economics into schools or onto the national curriculum, because I think its absence is a real detriment both to the economics profession, but also to our society. Thank you.
Great, Sarah, thank you. We started to get some questions coming through, and actually I'm going to stay with you if that's all right, because they relate to what you were describing and what Aaron raised, which was this point about, well, economics A-level particularly, but economics in school more generally. So is that at the discretion of the teacher, the head teacher, whether economics is taught, and so therefore a function of, you know, the supply of, as you mentioned, the supply of economics teachers, the interest of students, the interest of parents? Is that kind of an organic process, assuming it's not on the curriculum, in which case, you know, you have to do it, I assume. Can you say something about how that decision is reached in a school to teach or not teach economics?
I mean, it's not, I mean, it's on a school by school basis. I mean, I guess it's a bit of a sort of horse and cart issue, isn't it? So, you know, I think there will be demand for economics in schools if economics is offered. I mean, you've sort of seen from Aaron's figures that, you know, where economics is available, it's a very popular subject. So economics has just overtaken geography in terms of the number of students taking it at A-level. So it is popular, and given the fact that I'm pretty sure there's a geography teacher in most schools, but there isn't an economics teacher, it means that where it is available, it's you know, it's a popular subject. But, you know, I guess with limited resources and limited teachers, it's quite hard for schools to kind of fill those vacancies. And if it's not on the national curriculum, the impetus for kind of offering it is kind of less. So I don't, you know, I can't say that I know exactly what's happening in every school, but we do know there's a shortage of teachers, and there's I guess a lack of real momentum to kind of offer it, because I guess it's seen almost as a sort of an optional extra rather than something that's seen as really essential.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I was also struck by what you said about, what we know from the evidence about what works, and obviously that's something that as a discipline we care deeply about, and something that we can all think about in our work, how we can check the evidence on what matters. Maybe the mixed panelist doesn't work, but the mentoring does. That's important to hear, I think, and to share. I've got a question from Niall Glynn via YouTube, which I'm paraphrasing a little bit, which I think is about local communities and how we can open up economics to local communities, and make it more, people in local communities obviously understand economics. It affects their lives on a day-to-day basis, but we've got a jargon-heavy field, and his question is, how do we open up economics to those communities? So I'll come to that one just in a second. And Sarah, just before we leave you, I mean, feel free to address that one.
Yeah, I'm not, I think, again, so some of the blame lies with economists. So I think it was, so Marina Della Giusta did analysis of economists on Twitter compared to scientists, and found that economists tended to use more jargon and spoke to each other much more than scientists do. So I think there's increasing awareness of the need to kind of engage in more kind of public communication. So at Bristol, I'm very pleased with the fact that we've appointed the very first professor of the public understanding of economics. And since COVID, it's now based at Bristol, but a sort of a network of professors across the UK got together and launched what's called the Economics Observatory, which I think is really, a concerted effort from economists, academic economists, to bring evidence and insights on, the impact of COVID on, all dimensions of the economy and sort of society to wider audiences. So it's both targeted at policymakers, but also members of the public. And, any member of the public can ask a question, and, we'll try and kind of answer it with the latest economic evidence and insights. And there are some activities. There's a festival of economics in Bristol, if anyone wants to go. I think, again, it's sort of, I think economics has had, a number of issues with, its communication, its narrowness, its jargon, its increasing complexity. I think this needs to be addressed. There are some steps towards doing that, which is slow. But I think also, it's sort of on both sides, really. Ideally, I think people would feel empowered to sort of engage in economics debates, or realize that the debates that they're having are actually economics debates. I think there's this perception that economics is very complicated and very abstract and very technical and not for people to engage in. But actually, anyone can have a debate about economics. Lots of people kind of are thinking about economics. They just don't know it's economics, because economics is seen as being something that's, outside everyone's expertise or experience, which again is why, if it was sort of just, taught to people kind of from earlier on, or people are exposed to, economic thinking from earlier on, I think people would feel less disempowered and would feel better able to sort of engage. I think what's interesting is actually, so if you look at where economics does crop up in schools, it's actually sort of in there, but it's sort of called geography or, history. So I think kind of taking those bits out and sort of saying, look, that's economics. What you've been talking about, what you're discussing, what you're interested in is actually economics. I think there's quite a lot of mileage that could be done then to kind of reclaim it as something that people already are sort of familiar with. They just don't know it yet.
If I can jump in and add a third dimension to it. So I think Sarah's absolutely right that, one part is certainly us as academics and in government economic service, other professional economists. When we talk about economics, we have to speak plain English and speak in a language that people understand. It's also the case that if people were given any access, to some basic level of economic training at school, that would make it easier. But I think the third part is actually also what the media asks us to do, right? So when you get the economics correspondent come on the BBC, what are they there to talk about? They're there to talk about inflation or GDP or other things that, somehow they matter, and they certainly matter for the government budget. But if you're someone in your daily life and you become unemployed, do you care that inflation has gone up by 0.1%? Can you tell the difference? By that specifically, it's clearly not your precise inflation. Do you know what the increase in GDP tells you about your day-to-day? People are talking about economics. The whole debate last year about free school meals and whether the free school meals should be given out as cash vouchers, or whether you should be given just cash, not as vouchers, or whether you should be given food. That's like fundamental thing that academics argue about. What's the value of giving people stuff in money or in kind? And people were talking about it. And if you could go to the pub, you would have been talking about it at the pub. But people didn't know that was economics. And that's actually the kind of thing that we as academics mostly are talking about, much more than we spend time talking about forecasting GDP or whatever. But people see us as that. And when someone comes on to talk about, well, what's happening to healthcare and how should we fund it better? Or how should we improve things? When we think how should we fix climate problems? Say, oh, let's roll out the environment correspondent. Forget the fact that fundamentally what they're asking is an economic question, and they're here to talk about how do we think about a carbon tax versus some other policy versus trade policy here. That suddenly, because it's labeled as, oh, it's the environment, people don't realize, well, the discussion we're having here is actually economics again. And when we're talking about health, that was actually also an economic discussion. And I think it's really important, as exactly as Sarah says, to like really bring out to people that lots of these things that they hear in other contexts are really economics. And it's economists, not only, but economists are really important to studying that. We have our own approaches to it, and we provide a lot of the evidence. I mean, GS members don't just sit in the Treasury. I know Claire's in the Treasury, but they sit all across all of the other departments and have lots of important analysis to bring. And people just don't see that side of it. They think of economics as that Treasury bit or that macro bit, and not as all the other social policy bits. I think that's really important. We kind of change that, and part of that is changing how it's perceived in the media, for example, and people talking about that as economics questions.
Great, thank you. And I mean, that also connects to what Sarah was saying earlier about the sort of the hierarchy and the, what's valued in the profession. Definitely when I joined the profession, I thought being, a professional economist meant you were doing econometrics in, a Russell Group University. And it was really only over time that I realized that I was actually part of the profession myself, and that, what we were doing in DEFRA on animal disease, was absolutely economics and completely relevant to everybody's lives in the way that you're describing. So I think we need to be more confident about being relevant to people's lives as well. So let me come to some of the other questions that we've got. So there's a couple of questions about knowing more about A-level students and what motivates them, and how we reach students and how we understand why it is that economics isn't appealing to them. I just wondered if the panel said anything to say about that. I guess I'm struck by, I think it was the Telegraph that published graduate salaries recently, and again, economics is right up there. And whilst we don't want economics just to be perceived as, as you said, about money, obviously salary matters and so on. So that you would imagine there's clearly demand for economists. So it's what are people's experiences, or what do we know about A-level student choices, and the maths point as well. Sarah, you mentioned STEM have made progress, at least in terms of women participation in science, technology, engineering, and maths. There's been concrete progress made, and I'm interested that hasn't, as you say, I associate economics with maths, but that maybe hasn't manifested itself in improvements for women in economics. So
yeah, so I think in terms of the messages to give, I think different benefits of studying economics will appeal to different people. I don't think we should shy away from promoting the fact that economics has very high returns. I think particularly for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, when they're thinking about spending a lot of money on university, it is really important. I think other people will be more attracted to economics because it's, it's kind of ticking the boxes of helping understand society and being sort of, a way of, trying to change the world if you're studying development or sort of public policy. So, I think it's different messages for different audiences. I think a lot of it is about the relatable role models, seeing people like you who've studied economics and kind of gone on to be successful. I don't think everyone knows what the financial returns are. I think people, still see, I think the perception is that law and engineering are kind of more profitable than economics. And that's partly a sort of an education of parents, I think. People see known professions as being very safe degree subjects to choose. And again, the lack of familiarity with economists and what economists do doesn't help there, because you can't point at someone who's an economist and go, oh yes, they're kind of earning a great salary, because I just don't think economists are very visible kind of in a sort of day-to-day sense. So I think we're learning about some of the barriers. I think it is about sort of students' perceptions of what economics is, and also their lack of relatable role models. So I think it'd be fantastic if the GES are kind of thinking about more interventions sort of targeted at 15 to 18-year-olds. That's exactly the group that we think that we need to kind of get at as well. So, and hopefully that's really what we're trying to do with Discover Economics. There are a number of organizations who I think are building up momentum to try and change things, and I think really we need to work together so that we can try and do this at scale, go into schools, talk to people, remove those barriers to kind of accessing economics. I mean, it's interesting. So recent UCAS report identified economics as being sort of uniquely problematic in terms of access, because it's both something that very few people are familiar with, but also, many universities, you have to have studied maths. Students realized too late that they needed to study maths, and so they haven't, and so you can have these sort of barriers kind of emerging too late in the day, again because people don't really come to study it until relatively late in the process.
If I can just add on this, I think I think what's very clear from this discussion is that economics has got a massive PR problem, and I don't it's not really fair. I mean, in a sense, if you're thinking about what you want to do, economics, I mean, if you're interested in solving social problems, economics is the best tool to use. If you're interested in addressing climate change, it's a brilliant thing to study. If you're interested in development, it's a brilliant thing to study. It can help with all those things. It's also can be hugely lucrative depending on what you do. So I do think we need to do more as a profession, all of us really, in talking about what economics actually is about. Things like the Economics Observatory, if people haven't looked at it, I would really encourage you to look at it. It's brilliant. It's like full of absolutely fascinating things. It's all economics, but it's all very, very relevant discussions, and we should be doing more things like that, all of us across the profession. I mean, academia has really changed actually over the last sort of couple of decades that I've seen it, from going from just basically very, very dry technical analysis to much more relevant and playing a much greater role in sort of the policy making process and discussion. We're not yet seeing that breakthrough into the media, and if you think about how much actually you see all sorts of different people, when was the last time there was an economist on Question Time? When was the last time you see economists, speaking on like you say, on the news, other than because some latest bit of data has come out? So I do think there's more we all need to do in that space. I mean, the one thing I would just say around sort of minority interest around the thing about maths and women is I mean, it's absolutely right. Women are interested in all sorts of things. They can do very hard maths too, and I do think it's quite important we don't just say basically economics is a bit mathsy and that's what puts women off. I mean, as we've heard, actually more women study maths, but also actually there is nothing inherently there's nothing inherent about women that means they can't understand very complicated mathematical economics if they would like to, just as men can, just as everyone else can. So I do think it's important that we don't, it's not holding women back from studying physics or maths or other very quantitative subjects.
Great, thank you. Absolutely agree with that. So there's a couple of more questions coming through that I want to touch on, but we're also short on time. So let me tell you what the questions we've got are, and then we'll perhaps move around the panel on them before getting final comments. So Teal Cunningham, thanks for your question. It's back to this. It's about the barriers in schools, but the question is, what can employers and the GES, of course, do about those barriers in schools? So maybe we can come onto you in a moment on that. And Felicia, I'd be interested in T-Ben's perspective and whether you've got involved in schools yet, or whether it's too early. And then the other question we've got is from Valsa Shah on YouTube. Are there any programs to get economics into secondary schools and state schools in particular? So Sarah, I know you touched on that, but I guess it's this kind of differential between the state schools that is at the heart of that question. So Felicia, do you mind if I turn to you first? I'd also be interested in your reflections on some of the earlier questions, if you have any, particularly the community and getting economics across to more people.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of schools, well, TBEN in particular is something that we want to do, but we are still like a small organization and we all have full-time jobs. So it's quite difficult. But what we have been able to do in the past before the pandemic is partner up with different organizations to actually go to schools and stuff. So one of the organizations, Economy, the charity that tries to increase like economic literacy and knowledge around the public, we had like a sixth form session. So I was able to go there and speak to sixth form students along with other economists from the GES and other organizations to talk about the importance of economics and why it's necessary. So things like that, I think it would need to be a full like conjoined approach. And I really do appreciate what Discovery in Economics is doing at the moment, because that's where they're really like hitting the age groups. I also think that economics needs to move with the times, right? So, you know, these kids, they're on social media, they're doing things, the internet is much more where they're finding things. So to kind of bring the message to like social media or where the younger generations will find their information from. So meet them at where they're at. So I think that's a really important thing that the economics profession should try to do, to tap into, you know, the social media, the young hip, you know, the new trends that are going in, because economics, like the others were saying, is in everything. So even like, oh, the economics of TikTok, why is TikTok so popular over Instagram? Those kind of topics are the topics that are really going to get, you know, people interested in, oh, economics and TikTok, social media, wow, okay, this might be a subject that I might be interested in. And then, you know, follow the normal path, they maybe study at school. And then it can also help us as a profession also expand our ideas on what economics can actually do. I mean, we know it can help solve poverty, inequality and stuff, but even just stepping into other realms of what economics can be about can help us change our perspectives on some of the more traditional things that we're doing. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on that. And yeah, essentially, yeah, I think economics does have a major PR problem. And I do think part of the problem is also about what has been taught about economics in the past. So when I was being taught economics and stuff, and I'm looking at, you know, development economists from the US and from the UK who have never been raised in the countries that they're talking about for development, I'm just thinking this doesn't make sense to me, because I'm second generation migrant from Ghana, parents are from Ghana, they're talking about remittances and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, like I don't relate to this in a way, and my information is kind of different. But then when it comes to, you know, debating it in university, you're kind of the minority, so people are like, what are you saying, that kind of stuff, and it can kind of put you off in a way, especially when you're coming from a minority background. So it's some of the ways in which, you know, the profession and what it prioritizes and teaches can be isolating to minorities, because they don't see themselves in it, and then they don't see their perspectives valued within the profession. So I think along with like the whole PR thing, it's also about inclusivity and what we are teaching and people's voices and perspectives, and that's something that we really want to push with TBEN and everything like that. But yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, great. No, I think I'm more modern methods of communication, I think, are something we should all engage with and improve on. So that's a great thought. So we're coming to the end of our time. I just want to quickly get around the panel. I said I would give everybody one wish to leave us with on one thing that they'd like to see improved. And I wonder if Claire, if you could kick us off, perhaps and also pick up the question that we mentioned earlier, and then I'll go Sarah, Aaron, and then finish with Felicia.
Sure. You're going to have to remind me what the question was. I mean, the thing that I think I wish I have, and I think we can solve, is actually, I think we need to think about diversity and inclusion a bit more broadly. We've talked a lot about race and gender here, but we also remain very unrepresentative by socioeconomic background, very unrepresentative of you know, disabled people, and you know, there's a lot of other dimensions that we need to think about economics and inclusion across, and we don't have very good data, and we don't really understand what we're dealing with. So I think my wish would be actually just to improve understanding the scale of our reach. Great,
that's really nice. And just so we answer Tia's questions, it was about getting into schools and the GES. What's the GES?
Yeah, so I mean, we're about to launch a program of outreach whereby we'll have people going back, going to schools. I mean, the challenge with schools is, let's be honest, there's a lot of them. So, actually, this is where Felicia's modern methods of communication are the way. So you don't always have to do this in person, but we are going to do a lot more kind of in-person outreach, but also providing a lot more information to schools that give you a bit of a sense of, what if you come and work in the public sector on economics, the sorts of things you would be working on, and they are basically not the finance that people have in mind. I mean, there's a bit of that, but that's not the majority of what we do.
Super, thank you. Sarah, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so my wish would be just a world in which everyone sort of thinks that economics is a language that they can speak, because I think at the moment it isn't. And I think that is by more opportunities to see what economics is really about. That's a very sort of, it's a bit of a dream, but anyway, there you go.
That's it. I mean, we've all got to communicate it, haven't we? And that's the takeaway. Aaron?
So I agree with both of the wishes so far. Mine will be then to add to that, to get A-level, to get economics into all schools. Ideally the A-level as well, but also just on this curriculum, because I think it's both important that everyone gets some basic economics, just whether or not you're going through to A-level, whether you're going to take a technical qualification, you just need that earlier on in your life. You need to get some economics because it's really going to matter for the rest of your life. But also, we know that the A-level is really in the end the gateway to getting into the profession. In practice, it doesn't need to be. Universities don't care about it in that sense. We would happily take people without it, but people don't know enough economics without it. So A-level is still the gateway, and for as long as it is, we need economics A-level to be in more schools.
Great. And I wonder if we can practically do something about that. I mean, it's clearly it's a high demand subject.
So answering the question that someone picked up, I wasn't sure if we had time for it, but one of the things that we're doing at Discover is working with the OCR exam board to try and train people who are teaching not economics or some other subject, so they can also feel comfortable teaching economics. And that's a way of not trying to train someone up to be to start off as an economics teacher, because we don't have the capacity for that, but taking people who have trained to be teachers and have some other subject and interest and might want to think about offering this as well in their schools. And I think that's one way in which we can do it. Clearly, that's still going to take a long time to scale up, but that's certainly one approach that we're engaged in.
Super. And Felicia, last word to you. Any wishes?
My wish would be for the economics profession, as well as everything that the other panelists have said, but to really challenge the type of things it's preaching and the principles as well, to really open up to diverse understandings of how the economy or economics can operate. Because ultimately, once you open up and you become more inclusive, you will diversify, right? You will attract more people to the profession, and you'll create a profession that works for everyone, not just a minority. So that's my wish.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's a great place to finish. A really important idea. I think economics has shown itself to be a bit insular in some of the big questions. So that makes a lot of sense. So thank you very much, panelists. I think it's a great discussion that we could continue for a while. Thank you, audience, for the good questions. And let's stay active on this agenda. And I hope people have got some practical ideas out of what we've discussed today.